Hola, everybody. Welcome to the Chats with Yvonne podcast with me, your host, Yvonne Armenta. I talk about public speaking because I love it and I want to help you love it too. I like to think that my superpower is being able to connect our experiences and who we are back to why and how we experience the art of public speaking. So, in this podcast, we dive deep into all aspects of the art to help us understand our current experience with it and inspire our futuro as public speakers. Today's segment is all about resume and interview prep. If I had to take a guess, this is probably a close second to most dreaded things to do in the world, right next to public speaking. And if we break down the process of applying for jobs, it's a lot like prepping for that big speech on the biggest stage of your life. Maybe not so much the biggest stage, I may be exaggerating a bit here, but there are a lot of similarities, not only in the actual acts, but the feelings that come up beforehand, right? Like, am I good enough? Do I fit in? I don't meet the qualifications. Let me not even apply for it. This all makes me too nervous. I've been there, done that. Resume and interviews are literally created with the full intention of being critiqued. And being aware of that can be a really nerve-wracking experience. I mean, think about it. We have to send a resume for someone to even consider talking to us. And then when we get to the conversation part, we also know very well that they're assessing how we speak. There's a part of me that even thinks some people just should not be involved in the interview process without good training, because some people are just not great interviewers. And I mean the people interviewing you for the job, by the way. But while they catch up, we can always lean on our community. Our guest today is Alejandra. Her platform focuses on providing tips for resume and interview prep, and I couldn't think of a better person to prep us than her. Alejandra is a cybersecurity consultant for a Big Four firm and an alumni from the University of California, Berkeley. Having graduated during the COVID-19 pandemic and a job freeze, Alejandra realized the importance of marketing her experience and how to tell her story during the job application process, especially when pursuing a career outside of her major. She soon realized she was not the only graduate struggling to find a job post-graduation, and is now a content creator sharing tips about the job application process and her career as a Latina in corporate America. So let's get to it, y'all. And if by the end of this you have any questions, follow and reach out to Alejandra at Alejandra Marie V on Instagram and TikTok. She's so awesome.
I'm Alejandra Velasco. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Born and raised in Southern California, Carson, California, to be exact. I did move to the Bay Area for 4 years to pursue my degree, where I met Yvonne. But something personal about me, I am the oldest sibling and the oldest granddaughter of both sides. So I think that definitely has a lot to do with who I am as a person, constantly trying to be a role model, but consciously have become kind of a leader, right? Showing my sister, if you work really hard, you can go on trips or you can do this, and just to, be who you are, and just live life to your fullest. And a lot of that recently I just started kickboxing. I started kickboxing 2 months ago, and that has been putting me through it, really challenging me both mentally, physically, emotionally. But that's just a little bit about who I am. I'm super family oriented, and that's probably what I pride myself most on.
I love that Alejandra touches on being a role model without really telling people how to do it, but showing them. I think the way that she's a role model to her siblings is how she shows up for all of us in her content. Before we dive deep into the conversation, I want to share a moment that happened between us in the beginning that I think speaks to the conversation we're about to have. This was totally not meant to be a part of the podcast episode, but I think it brings up an important point about what it means to, one, be prepared, and two, being authentic, especially in a corporate setting, or rather having to consciously show up a certain way in corporate America, for example. You hear Alejandra ask me if our Zoom session will be recorded with the video on.
Are we doing video?
No, we won't.
Okay, cool. Because I have my notes here, so I'm like,
no, you're good. You can totally look at them. Yeah. Okay. Girl, I would not be looking like this.
Oh, I wasn't sure. So I was like, but I mean, you choose how you want to come on,
No, yeah.
No, it's just comfortable.
Yeah, it's just audio. First of all, if that's not an indicator that I looked busted, I don't know what is. I think I had gotten back from a workout or something and I need to put a hat on really quickly. But there are two things that I'd like for us to pay attention to. One, you heard her ask about whether we'd have the camera on during the session and that she had notes. It's important to ask these types of questions so that you're as prepared as possible. And if you thought that maybe this wasn't appropriate to ask a job interviewer, this is your green light to do so. Ask questions. Ask questions that will make you feel as prepared as possible. Ask about the duration of the interview if they haven't let you know, what the environment will be like, etc. It's cool to ask, trust me. And two, how we present ourselves is actually really important. While we want to remain authentic to who we are, being in the role of interviewee can dictate how we decide to show up. During this session, I understood my environment and felt comfortable to show up as I was, especially because I've known Alejandra for years. In an interview setting, that may not be the case. I just think it's important to pay attention to those things and decide for yourself what you define as professional. I can do an entire podcast episode on this, by the way, so let me know if y'all want that. I loved that Alejandra reassured me in my looks, though. And she herself actually has some great content on TikTok all around the outfits she picks for her corporate job because it's part of pitching yourself.
Just a little bit more about me, the professional side. So I'm a Latina in corporate America, specifically within the tech industry, but I didn't start there. I was a legal studies major in undergrad, realized I didn't want to go to law school. It wasn't for me. So quickly just, tried to see other avenues, what else was out there. And I ended up ultimately in the product marketing space within the tech industry. Was able to work my way up to be able to get into like software quality assurance, user acceptance testing. And a lot of it was really just me trying to be about building equitable, accessible applications to people. And it really started in the healthcare industry. From there, I decided to pivot. I'm now within the professional services industry as a cybersecurity consultant. So I did a complete 180 from healthcare to cybersecurity. I'm constantly looking for a change. I'm constantly looking to adapt, learn, and grow. And with all of those changes, it hasn't been easy, right? It's been a challenge. It's been a learning curve. And it comes back to resumes, interviews. How am I able to pitch myself as a legal studies major to get into cybersecurity? And when I really graduated, I fell into kind of like the post-grad life depression is real. I don't know if you don't have a job lined up, it's real. And almost everybody I know has experienced it, myself included. And I just, I had done fellowships, I had learned resume tips, I had learned interview tips, and I was applying them. And luckily, I was actually able to get a job post-grad within 3 months, which is fairly quickly compared to some other people. It can take 6 months to a year. There's really no time to it. And I was just like, all of us are equally as, successful, and we can all be doing these roles, but why aren't my friends getting hired? Or, I know this person is qualified, why aren't they getting an interview? So that really kind of brought up my platform of, I know these people are successful. I know they meet the qualifications. What's kind of, where's the mishap here? And that's what really kind of drove me to start my content and, start posting and just giving tips, because girl, if my community is winning, I'm winning. So, it's really on us to share that information. I feel like it's on, and part of being the older sister, right? I feel like it's me of sharing that information and making sure we're all building together.
So, it's not that we're lacking in a skill, but that maybe we haven't had the tools to navigate a certain space and, quote, speak their language. It seems like what Alejandra was saying wasn't that her peers weren't freaking great at what they did, but that maybe they weren't yet well-versed in how to talk about what they did in a compelling way. I say this all of the time, but if public speaking were something we practiced from a young age consistently, think about how different the situation Alejandra describes might be. To better understand how to improve, we first have to understand the purpose of a resume versus the purpose of an interview.
And it's funny because I actually did a poll the other day and I said, what's the hardest part of the interview? And a lot of the responses, people said, getting the interview. So when I look at your resume, I think of a resume as an opportunity to highlight your achievements, your impacts, your quantitative metrics, right? Why are you the best? Why should we hire you for this job? And oftentimes it's also a cultural thing. We're not known to highlight our achievements, our impacts, and, why we're deserving of this role. Whereas an interview, I like to view the interview as an opportunity to share your story, an opportunity I always say there's no better person to share your story than yourself. You're the best person to be able to share your story. So how did you achieve this, right? How did you do it? What tools did you use? What skills do you have? And I always say, just get me to the interview. Just get me to the interview, because nobody can tell my story better than I. Just in summing it up, a resume, just highlighting all those achievements, impacts. Interview is really telling your story, telling your narrative of how you were able to achieve those accomplishments.
Similar to public speaking, I always say you can see on a resume where I graduated from, what my achievements are, but what you don't see is the how. What I went through to graduate from college, the hurdles I went through, or the lessons I learned from working on a particular project. The story piece is what makes you unique. Those details are what you go up on stage and share. We care that you graduated from college, but what was that experience like? Tell me about the relationships you created, the losses you had, the impact you created, the hard learned lessons. The public speaking part is like your interview. Anyone can say, I executed an event for 500 people, but your story is the how. How you achieved it and the impact you left on the people that attended the event. This can all be a nerve-wracking experience, just like public speaking. And I really wonder how we can get past the fear of interviews.
Interviews are intimidating. I had one today and I had so much anxiety. And I think that's just part of the process, right? It's this level of vulnerability, right? You're opening up, you're telling your story, and it's almost, they're giving you validation. Are you or are you not qualified? And even if you're not seeking that validation, that's what an interview is. It's validating whether you are or you aren't. So I think for me, the biggest time when it got less intimidating, because that feeling never really goes away, is when I kind of had a change in my mindset. And it really kind of started in UC Berkeley. I had failed a math class, and did I do everything that I can to prepare? Did I do everything I could to learn this concept? If I did, then I need to be fine with that. I ultimately ended up getting an F because I did everything that I could. So when I started viewing interviews in that way of, what do I need to do to be comfortable ultimately with the end result, right? So do I need to practice? Do I need to prepare? I know now, ideally, I want 2 days in advance. I would like to know who I'm interviewing with. I like to kind of guide my interview responses based on the interviewer. So kind of developing what I need in order for me to be comfortable with the interview and the interview results.
And that makes sense. Everyone has different levels of comfortability with interviews and in public speaking. The things that make you nervous may not be the elements that make me nervous. Maybe you get extremely nervous when you don't know who will be interviewing you, and I get more nervous when I do know. To understand that, we have to reflect on our experiences. Think about it. What was your first or most recent interview experience like? Let's hear from Alejandra about hers.
I think of like my first real interview as my first big girl interview post grad. And so I interviewed for this role as a business consulting testing analyst role. And I prepared as much as I could. So I prepared for like 3 days in advance. I was making like an org chart based off of LinkedIn, kind of like, okay, this person follows this person. Okay, this is what I think I do. I think they fall under this team, right? Kind of building the building blocks of what I need, right, to be comfortable during the interview. And I go to the interview. It's 5 people. And this, it's almost like you have a blackout, if that makes sense at all. It's like you black out. And I just remember at the end of the interview, like, oh my God, like I completely like bombed this thing. I thought at the time they were asking me a lot of technical interview questions, what I felt were technical. And for example, like, do you know these applications? Do you know these softwares? And I didn't know them, but then this is probably one of my big interview tips too, is if you don't know something, just say, okay, but how is it near, close to something that you've done previously, right? So they would ask me, do you know this application? No, but I've used these applications in these settings. So kind of, saying why you're still the right person for the job. And that was a lot of what I did throughout that interview. So I'm thinking, well, why would I get hired? I clearly didn't hit on anything that they were kind of looking for. But looking back at it now, it wasn't even technical. It was just a gap in knowledge of the terminology that they were using that I just wasn't aware of. Ultimately, I ended up getting the job and I cried because I completely was like, there's just no way. There's just no way I was gonna get the job. But I think ultimately, right, my practice, my preparation, being able to pivot in those scenarios where I necessarily didn't know the answer, but was still able to adapt to give an answer that they felt was still, impactful, and ultimately I could still be the best person for the job. Um, but yeah, it's intimidating, and that interview fear just never really goes away. And from that moment, I felt it was like a shift in my interview experience, I would say.
First of all, I totally understand blacking out on stage all too well. And then rewatching a video later and thinking, dang, like I said that? Like that was bomb. Our perception of ourselves is very different to what people actually see. Alejandra also touched on something that reminded me a little of the quick 5-minute PR training I had when I was asked to interview for Telemundo, a Spanish network, about the work that my job was doing at the time. Mind you, I can speak Spanish, but professionally speaking in Spanish is hard for me. It's not something I practice as much as I should or would want to. So I had one thing that I was on there to promote, and that was the launch of a new initiative. And I was told that anytime the interviewer went in a different direction or I wasn't sure what to say, that I should stick to the point that I wanted to make. So, in an interview, maybe they ask you something technical or other that you're not sure how to answer. But because you've prepped and you have that one strength or group of strengths that you really want to promote, you can always relate your answer back to those. And I wondered if Alejandra felt the same.
That's exactly what I did. So they said they were focused on user acceptance. And when I think of user acceptance, right, it's just the adaptability to be able to accept, integrate. Well, now my definition is very different than what it was before, but just basically someone having access to that application or product, whatever it might be. And I definitely bullshitted my way through it, but I kept reiterating accessibility, being equitable, being a product that we're all, now I can see why they hired me. Like now I'm like, yeah, I definitely had like the right background for this role. But in that moment in time, I just didn't understand the terminology that they were using and how it related to my experience.
And I like to call that educated bullshitting and critical thinking. Relate everything back to the things that you do know. Also, you always know more than you think you know. But is there such a thing as over preparing?
Okay, for some people there might be over preparing. For me, I don't think you can prepare. You can prepare, but it's never enough. And that's personally my experience. Whereas some people, they're prepare, and then they start overthinking, and then they're like, I rather just not prepare. But for me, I'm definitely the person. I don't think that there's enough that you can do to be overprepared. And that part of me that goes back to your comfortability of being able to tell your story, tell your narrative within the interview. I'm that person. I need 2 to 3 days to prepare. And I am searching the web, searching all the possible interview questions. I'm breaking down the job description and making up my own questions. If I'm really passionate about the job, I'm asking my friends if they can interview me. Um, I and ultimately too, it's also a little bit of muscle memory. And I personally don't like to memorize scripts. I like to highlight key bullets, key things that I'm trying to hit on, and muscle memory to remind me of, okay, I needed to hit on this. I didn't hit on this, hit on this. Um, so I personally don't think that there's such a thing as over preparing, but whatever makes you the most comfortable for success throughout your interview.
Alejandra and I are very different when it comes to preparing for an interview. I'm definitely the person that if I prepare too much, I start to overthink, and my delivery won't be that good. I know that about myself. I'm not the person that will Google everyone and create an org chart like she did, and often my interview practice is me looking through the job description, taking mental note about what I would say if asked about something, and going into the interview. This is, however, very much true because I know myself as a public speaker. A process like Alejandra's sounds like the ideal thing for me if I were to pivot my career, for example. Maybe going into a different field where I would have to prove that just because I haven't been in the role I'm applying to doesn't mean I don't have the skill sets for it. So, how do we tell that story?
I'm going to reiterate, I think interviews are you telling your story. And the way that I choose to tell my story, and you probably heard this before, the STAR method, the situation, task, action, result. So I like to use the STORE method. So situation, task, obstacle, action, result. And the reason why I like to do store is because whenever you're thinking about an example or just a situation, it tends to always not go as planned. You have your hiccups, things just come up. So I like to highlight those obstacles because I like to be able to explain, right, how I was able to communicate or how I was able to adapt or how I was able to be a team player. I like to leverage that opportunity to reiterate why I'm the best candidate for the role. And oftentimes when, doing your storytelling or when you're in the store process, people tend to describe a lot about the team, right? What did the team do? Because at the end of the day, within any company, within any organization, or even a school project, you're all trying to strive for the same goal. So you tend to mention, oh, our team did this, our team did this. But I really like to highlight what my impacts were relative or within the team, and really stay focused on that because it's really easy to distract, how this person impacted this. So just really highlighting my key experiences within that process, and my skills.
So we got to be less humble, y'all. Tell your story like it is. And remember that everything you do is a skill set that you've acquired and worked hard for.
When I think back to my first interview or even just, the first few months within my job, I don't want to say I was naive, but maybe I was a lot more reserved. I wasn't willing to be as outspoken or question things, or, I would think about something, but, I wouldn't speak to it. And now I'm a lot more vocal in that area. So if I have a question, I'm going to ask. If I don't understand something, I'm going to get that clarification. Or if I do have a suggestion, I'm going to suggest it. And I think within social media, it's a lot of also like PMO skills, like project management skills, and going through my story and being able, what do I want to convey, right? What do I want my audience? What do I want my message to be? And I often find myself repeating what I'm saying over and over and over again. And that has actually reduced the use of my filler words. So I'm really glad about that. But overall allows me to be more confident. So I find myself to be a lot more confident now in my voice, in my message. And even if I don't know what I'm talking about, I've gotten that I sound confident. So I will take that as a compliment. But I feel like it's definitely helped in that area. And also just seeing myself confidently as well, right? Like I do know what I'm talking about. I often question, I didn't get a degree with a tech degree, a STEM degree. I majored in legal studies, and am I really worth being here? You kind of questioning the space that I'm in. But I've kind of grown now that confidence, and part of it has been through that social media validation of, what, I am in the tech industry, I am in the tech space, and I deserve to recognize that. So giving myself that confidence. And when it comes down to hindering, yes and no. It's also a little bit of fear because it's like, has anyone at work seen my content? Has anyone seen my stuff? And I'm like, I don't know if I want them to see my stuff. But it's also hindering because I'm not able to share everything that I would like. For example, I went through 2 interview processes, and as a career, and career creator, I had to sign NDAs, and they had no clue that I was even a content creator, but I had to sign NDAs about my interview process, and I'm not allowed to share what that interview process was like. I'm not able to share my full story and be vulnerable. And even if it was a good process, so I think there are those experiences that I think will be very beneficial for others that ultimately I'm not, able to share, that I wish I would have been able to.
And y'all, remember that sounding confident is probably 90% of the battle. Wait, I don't want to say battle. I don't like that word. It's not a battle. That has a negative connotation to it a little bit. Let's just say the journey, which, by the way, can sometimes be annoying because think about how many times you've been in a room with someone where you clearly know more than them on the subject matter, but they sound more confident, and therefore people are more gravitated towards listening to them. That's annoying, especially as Latinas in the room. I can't tell you how many times this has happened to me. Next, I thought it'd be cool to do a mini interview with Alejandra and see how she would answer questions for a job interview. I initially asked her a random question about a random job, and as we've learned for her, it's important to be as prepared as possible. So we narrowed it down to a social media project manager position. Here's how it went.
This is the only reason that I'm hung up, is because when you say social media project manager, I'm very the person, I need the job description. So I'm going to write out my elevator pitch based off of that job description. And I'll give an example, and we can redo this as like my actual elevator pitch. So I'm putting my partner out here on blast, but so he's an industrial engineer by education. He's a packaging engineer now by experience, but he's looking to pivot within systems engineering. So all under the engineering umbrella, but within different fields of engineering. So we're practicing his elevator pitch, and he was like, well, how do I describe what I'm trying to learn? And so, and I'm gonna just say his elevator pitch, but I'll reframe it here. So just like, hi, like I'm Alejandra Velasco. I graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in industrial engineering. During my time in undergrad, I was actually able to intern with a aerospace defense company as a engineering intern. It's because I'm trying to like not exploit like his information, but
So
like,
maybe would you say, like, when you answer this question, right, what are the buckets of information that you should fill out? Like that you should check
yeah.
off? Like, is it like, hey, my name is, I've been here, I've done this, and I want to learn and grow in this? Like, how would
Yeah.
you say, like, give us an outline for how to answer that question,
I
maybe?
like to start with, right, like, so hi, my name is like Alejandra Velasco. I went to, depending on if you're interviewing for more entry level or senior roles, I would see if you want to say what school you went to first, what your major was. So for example, I'm Alejandra Velasco. I went to the University of California, Berkeley, and I graduated with a legal studies degree. Upon my time during undergrad, I interviewed with a healthcare company working in product marketing management. From there, I was able to leverage my product background into getting a experience within software quality assurance and user acceptance testing, where I was able to focus on human-centered design, acceptance of the product, and integration. And then from there, it's just a brief background of what you did, right? But are you looking to change completely 360? So with my, experience going into now cyber, or my partner's experience going into a different field within engineering, this is where I break down the job description and I try to highlight the key points, right? So for example, he was looking to going into systems engineering. So within that, it's business processes, it's rules and regulations, and it's architecture framework. So then I say, I'm looking to expand my experience within, business processes, system architecture framework, and process controls, for example. And that's where I'm hoping to, be able to advance my skills within this role. And then from there, I always like to tie in something a little bit more personable to who I am as a person. So for example, if you're looking to relocate closer to home or closer to family, you can say something like that, or just, something that you like to do outside of your 9 to 5. And I could probably go through an entire elevator pitch, but I just need
No, I think that serves the purpose of what I'd want people to understand,
okay.
like how you introduce yourself and what that should actually look like. Because tell me about yourself is one of those questions where, especially in a professional setting, you can, because if you don't prepare for it, you can get real nervous and start talking about like, well, I'm the oldest sibling of 3 and
Yeah.
my favorite color is yellow. And that's not what you want to do, right? So you want to give them the information that they're actually looking for, but if you don't prepare for it, you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
And
And sorry to cut you off there, but to be completely honest, I think this is raw and this is real, right? I need to practice. I need to prepare. I need to have intent. And that's probably one of the biggest things with me. I need to know what the intention is for. What am I looking out of this conversation? What am I helping to get out of this information interview or this interview? What role? I need intent. And I think that's how I share my story, how I tell somebody who I am, right? What am I looking for? And if it is, a new job within, for example, I moved to cyber. I'm looking to build a cybersecurity framework and understanding of business process controls within cyber, right? So then I'm going to incorporate that within my elevator pitch. And this is probably, and it's funny that I stumble on it now because I very rarely ever stumble on it, but this is a lot of the hardest part for some people is telling their story. I will say I'm full 100%. I need intent. I need to know why I'm introducing myself and in what way.
intent is so important, y'all. I think what you heard is a clear example of what happens when there are questions left unanswered. We can't just shoot our shot in the dark. We have to be intentional because being intentional and understanding what our goal is and preparing for something specific will help us feel more confident in what we say, as well as help us clearly craft our story for that particular interview. If you don't understand what your intended impact is, you can't tailor your message and clearly convey it to your audience. Usually, you're not at a job interview trying to share with them your entire life story. You just need to share enough to get your foot in the door.
My biggest tip is just we're constantly evolving. We're constantly evolving as people and as humans, and throughout your resume and your interview process, right? Your resume is kind of your story evolving throughout the years. And I think it's just a reminder not to be too hard on yourself with that, right? You tell your story. Nobody can tell your story better than you, and have confidence doing it, right? Because you're already qualified. You have it. And the person that needs to believe it the most is you.
I want to say thank you to Alejandra for taking the time to walk us through that and sharing more insight. If you ever think that you're alone in the way you experience interviewing or resume prep or even public speaking, you're not alone. When you're able to, check out her platform and follow her for career and lifestyle content. And remember that when in doubt, you are 100% the shit. Own it. Nos vemos a la próxima.